Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining in on our ELA virtual instruction for the week of April 27th to May 1st. Here are your tasks for the week. This is just an overview of what you will be responsible for. You have your weekly attendance question, your Achieve 3000 article, the poem The End and the Beginning by Wisława Szymborska. You're going to have 3 parts of the assignment. Like always, you have 6A, which is the before reading activity, 6B, which is the during reading activity, and 6C, which is the after reading activity. And lastly, you have your independent reading log, which is located on that same document. So if you have not done so already, please go ahead and answer the attendance question on Teams. The question for this week is, who do you admire and why? Name one person that you admire and explain why you admire them. This post needs to be more than 1 complete sentence. Post your answer by May 1st to be marked present for the week. If you have not done so yet, go ahead and complete your Achieve article for the week, which is Joy, So Brave, You're Crazy, and answer the questions. You need to score a 75% or higher on the first try for this to count. So this is just the standard that we are going to be looking at. Our focus for this week is standard RL 2.4. It's a literature standard. So it tasks us with being able to determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in the text, including figurative and connotative meanings, analyze the cumulative impact of specific word choices on meaning and tone. For example, how the language evokes a sense of time and place, and how it sets a formal or informal tone. So let's unpack this a bit. Tone is simply the attitude of the author within a text towards the subject that they are writing about. Tone is often confused with mood, which is the emotional response that the reader experiences. The tone that the author establishes in the text significantly impacts the reader's mood. So these two terms are very much connected to one another. Why is it important for us to understand the tone within a text in both literary and informational? When we are interacting with content that reveals the feelings of an author, we are positioned to better understand their perception of the world in which he or she lives. When readers understand the perspective or viewpoint of the author, we are then tasked with further examining our own. These are important text-to-self connections that build engagement in the reading process. So literature is often a window and a mirror, which is why it's an essential aspect to our cultures. A mirror is just a story that reflects your own existence and helps you build your identity and view of the world. A window is a resource that offers you a view into someone else's experience. Once we develop an intimate understanding of life through literature, our society evolves to accommodate diverse perspectives on the issues at hand. Literature uniquely shapes the future and reflects the past. Okay, so let's get ready to complete our pre-reading activity. You're going to watch a YouTube video as always, and then on your assignment, you're going to answer a couple of questions. So this week's text is a poem called The End and the Beginning, which explores the realities of war and what happens after war. So this video is a reading of a highly celebrated, very famous poem called Dulce et Decorum Est by Wilfred Owen, which takes readers on a journey through a soldier's grim experience on the battlefield during the war. So go ahead and just copy and paste this link here into your browser. Once you're done, I will meet you back on the assignment. Go ahead and pause the video here. So after you have watched that YouTube video, you're going to work on assignment 6A, which is the pre-reading activity. So after you viewed that video on YouTube, just respond to the 2 questions below. Number 1, briefly research the Latin phrase and what does that phrase mean? Okay, so I want you to just look that up on Google or on your search engine and just tell me what it means right here. Consider your personal opinion on the meaning of the phrase, Dulce et Decorum Est. Do you believe that Dulce et Decorum Est stands to be true, or do you believe that it is false or a lie? Explain why. Okay, so after you've watched the video and you figure out what that means, I want you to write that out here. Once you're done with that, take about 5-ish minutes with that, and then I'll meet you back on the PowerPoint. Pause the video here. Okay, so to help build our understanding of tone, let's consider an analysis of the tone in the poem that you guys just read. So, or listened to essentially. Some scholars believe that the tone of this anti-war poem is bitter. Owens is bitter at the way warfare, and in particular World War I, has been glorified. This leads to the ironic title, Dulce et decorum est, which is just a Latin phrase meaning it is sweet and honorable. Okay, so it should have, in your document, you should have had something to that effect on your answer sheet. It is taken from a longer passage from Horace, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, which means it is sweet and honorable to die for one's country. The vivid, violent imagery in the poem shows in contrast that dying for one's country is anything but sweet and honorable. The soldiers in the opening lines are not sweet, noble, or heroic. They are, quote, knock-kneed and coughing like hags. They are weary, blind, lame, limping, fatigued. Much of the poem describes the horrific effects of a gas attack. Once again, Owen shows the misery and lack of glory in war. The blood gurgles from the lungs of the gas victim as he is jolted along in a wagon while sores form on his tongue. The speaker ends bitterly by stating that if people could see the horrors, they would not believe that it is sweet and honorable to die for one's country. So let's clarify the larger question that we need to understand when reading the poem, the next poem that we're going to be looking at, called The End and the Beginning. This essential question is what we must be able to answer by the end of our lesson. How does the author, Wisława Szymborska, establish a somber yet optimistic tone on the subject of war and its aftermath in her poem, The End and the Beginning? Throughout reading of this poem, we have to discover the true meaning of the phrases used in the stanzas, which will then reflect her perspective of war and its aftermath. We will search for lines that suggest both her feelings of somberness and optimism. A somber tone is oppressively solemn, sad, and depressed. However, an optimistic tone is hopefulness about the future, which is generally positive and uplifting. Now, let's look at assignment 6B, and we're going to start preparing to work on that. So while reading the poem, The End and the Beginning, this is on page 351 and 352. I'm going to pause periodically during the reading and offer explanations or pose a question to build your understanding of the text and our essential question. So be an active reader and read with me. So go ahead and just pull up your document here, go to assignment 6B. Just go ahead and follow the directions here and read along as I read. While reading the poem, The End and the Beginning by Wisława Szymborska, complete the graphic organizer below, which includes the poetry stanzas, column 1, its meaning in your own words, column 2, your categorization of each stanza as the end or the beginning, column 3, and the tone, somber or optimistic, of the speaker within each stanza, column 4. Okay, so this is just talking about the ultimate meaning here. So what does Szymborska want readers to understand about war and its impact on soldiers? You just want to put your message in, put the message in your own words, and you're just going to start off each of your boxes with these beginning phrases here. When you're categorizing if it's the end or the beginning, you just want to determine if the author is portraying the end or the beginning of war, which she's talking about. The end is the destruction of life. The beginning is the start of a new life, moving beyond the past, going into the future. Lastly, you want to see if it is somber or optimistic. So is her tone somber, optimistic, or objective in the stanza? Pay attention to the underlined words and phrases in the stanzas. So remember that somber means oppressively solemn, sad, or sober in mood, very depressing. Optimistic is obviously very hopeful about the future. And objective just means factual with no emotion whatsoever. There are not very many thoughts like this throughout that poem. Okay, so please note that it's broken up by stanza here for you. Okay, so I'm gonna model some of them for you as we read. So go ahead and, like always, just kind of put your document small there, and then we're going to try to make this small as well. see if it'll work that way. Okay, so once again, this is the text, which it's a poem by Wisława Szymborska, The End and the Beginning. This is the first stanza. After every war, someone has to clean up. Things won't straighten themselves up after all. Okay, so that's the first stanza. That's it. We're just going to start looking at that one here. Okay, so when she's talking about this, when I'm going to say the ultimate meaning of this is just that war brings the kind of damage and destruction that doesn't heal on its own or over time. Things won't straighten themselves up. So it's not going to just do it on its own. After the war, soldiers have to take action to restore life. So I'm going to just type that in here. So I'm going to say war brings the sort of damage and destruction that doesn't Ms. Burns can't talk today. Doesn't heal on its own over time. After the war, soldiers have to action to restore life. Okay, so we know that that's the ultimate meaning. So now we need to figure out which part is she talking about? Is she talking about the end or is she talking about the beginning? So obviously here she's saying the term after, so this is the end. So I'm just going to type in end here. Lastly, we need to figure out what the tone is. Is the tone somber or optimistic or objective? I would say that because she's talking about destruction here, like when she's talking about having to clean up, that's not really a positive thing. Things won't straighten up themselves. That's a little bit more somber, so I'm going to add that here. Okay, so we've got the first one done here. Now let's move on to the next one. Someone has to push the rubble to the side of the road so the corpse-filled wagons can pass. Okay, so when she's talking about this rubble and all the corpse-filled wagons, that's indicating that there's a lot of people who are dying or who have died. So this is obviously indicating that war is filled with a lot of death. And when she's referring to these soldiers that have to kind of straighten things up, so she's saying someone has to push the rubble to the side of the road. So these soldiers are seeing all these dead people. So I'm going to add here, war is, let's say, inevitably filled with death, and the soldiers have to confront this reality when they are cleaning up the aftermath of the war. Okay, so if she's still talking about after the war when all these people have died, so obviously that's indicating the end here. And once again, when she's talking about a corpse-filled wagon, that's not indicating any sort of positive emotion, and it's not objective either. It's definitely like this negative, somber, very depressing when you talk about a corpse-filled wagon. So I'm going to add somber there. Okay, next stanza here. Someone has to get murd and scum and ashes, sofa springs, splintered glass, and bloody rags. Okay, so when what she's talking about here is that if they have murd here, let's look up what that means, because I'm not sure what that means. When I look at that term, I'm not really sure what it's talking about there. So mur means to become stuck in mud. Okay, so this term here becomes stuck in mud. It's not even just kind of like, oh, we're stepping in something or whatever. It's really, really stuck in mud. So when someone gets stuck in scum and ashes, sofa springs, splintered glass, and bloody rags. So when she's talking in war, soldiers are finding themselves stuck in this debris of war, which is very painful. Bloody rags, splintered glass, those are all very negative terms. So here I'm going to put in times of war. I don't know why this is highlighted. Let's see if I can get rid of that. There we go. In times of war and afterwards, soldiers find themselves deeply stuck in the breeze of war, the aftermath, which is very much filled with pain, sadness. Okay, so obviously that's once again talking about the end here. And this, if she's talking about being stuck in scum and ashes, sofa springs, once again, that's very negative tone. So I'm going to put somber here. Okay. Let's move on to the next stanza here. Someone has to drag in a girder to prop up a wall. Someone has to glaze a window, rehang a door. Okay. So once again, she's saying someone has to do this, right? Someone has to drag in a girder to prop up a wall. Someone has to glaze a window, rehang a door. So the soldiers, once again, are having to work tirelessly to rebuild after the war, right? So I'm going to say here, after the war, the soldiers are tirelessly, that is definitely not how you spell that, tirelessly trying to rebuild a place that has been destroyed. Okay, and I say destroyed because when you're saying you have to prop up a wall, that means the wall has fallen down, dragging a girder, prop up a wall, glaze a window, rehang a door. That's all indicating some sort of destruction. So the place has been destroyed from battle. Y'all know I struggle with typing. It's very evident here. It's embarrassing, but it's all right. The buildings that she's talking about, the buildings here, the ones that have collapsed now need to be brought back to life. So they're piecing everything together. Okay, so the buildings need to be brought back to life, and the soldiers have to everything together little by little. Okay, so if they're piecing things back together, if they're bringing it back to life, that's indicating here this start to a new life, moving beyond what has happened here. So I'm going to put beginning here. And this part is a little bit more, it's not as negative, right? It's not saying, you know, that there's blood and there's scum and people's ashes and everything, and that someone has to drag in these things. It's a little bit more optimistic. I think it could probably go either way depending on what you think. But I'm going to put optimistic here. But remember that when you're reading poetry, as I told you guys before, a lot of the times it's kind of up to your own interpretation. Okay, so if you feel that it's better suited and you think it's more somber because it's talking about, you know, things being destroyed, then that's up to you. Okay, let's scroll down here. Now we're on this section here. Photogenic it's not and takes years. All the cameras have left for another war. So after the war, what she's talking about here, after the war, people, not just soldiers, will have to spend years recovering from everything, okay, recovering from the destruction. So during this era of healing and restoration, the attention shifts away from the battlefield and towards another crisis, which is that trying to bring everything back together. So I'm going to add that information here. So after the war, people, civilians, and soldiers will have to spend years trying to recover from the destruction that the war has brought. During this time of healing, the attention shifts from the war to rebuilding, which in itself is okay. So once again, this is if it's talking about rebuilding after the war, this aftermath, we're talking about a new beginning here. Okay, now this part here, this is one of those interesting times when the author doesn't really have any emotions. It's just saying photogenic, it's not, and takes years. All the cameras have left for another war. So that is not really negative, or it's not sad, it's not happy, and it's more objective here. It's this factual, just facts. There's not really a lot of emotion that's indicated here. So I'm just going to put objective here. We'll need the bridges back and the new railway stations. Sleeves will go ragged from rolling them up. Okay, now this part here. So she's still talking about how these soldiers have to restore life to this place that has been destroyed. Soldiers have to they come up with these new places, new bridges, build these bridges back, new railway stations. Sleeves will go ragged from rolling them up. So this is just kind of indicating that there's a lot of work to be done. So when she's talking about that, she's also referring to those lines 14 to 17 here. So someone has to drag a girder, prop up a wall. So she's still referring to that someone. Those someones are the soldiers, right? So here she's still talking about how soldiers have to work to restore the land, restore the place of war. Soldiers embrace that opportunity. Embrace meaning they just go with it. The sleeves will go up. In other words, they're more inclined to help rebuild after the war. So soldiers embrace that opportunity to rebuild. And then over here, if they're rebuilding, once again, that's obviously going to be beginning. And this one is definitely more when she's talking about building these bridges back, new railway stations, sleeves go ragged from rolling them up. This stanza in itself doesn't really talk about the tragedy of war. It's talking about moving on and moving forward. So this is definitely a bit more optimistic. Someone, broom in hand, still recalls the way it was. Someone else listens and nods with unsevered head. But already there are those nearby starting to mill about who will find it dull. Okay, so this part here, when she's talking about someone broom in hand still recalls the way it was. So in other words, the way it was in the past. Someone else listens and nods with unsevered head, but already there are those nearby starting to mill about who will find it dull. So they get tired of hearing about the past. They get tired of focusing. Oops, sorry. They get tired of focusing on the past, reflecting on things from before the war happened, and they start shifting their attention to the future. Okay, so I want you to type that in here. I'm just going to verbally say it. After the war, many soldiers grow tired of focusing on the past and shift their attention towards the future instead. So once again, after the war, many soldiers grow tired of focusing on the past and shift their attention towards the future instead. So after the war, the focus is no longer on what was and what it used to be like, but it's more about what is and what will be. So once again, if we're talking about if they're shifting that focus from the past to the future, this is obviously indicating the beginning, which is what I'm going to put right here. And that's also indicating they don't want to hear about the past anymore. They want to think about the future. They're more thinking about the future, which is more optimistic. So I'm going to put that there. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next stanza here. I'm just going to put little, let's see if I can get this down. There we go. Okay. From out of the bushes, sometimes someone still unearths rusted out arguments and carries them to the garbage pile. Okay, so what she's talking about here, she's just saying a lot of times these soldiers cling on to their deeply rooted views and beliefs surrounding war, but they know that it's irrelevant and has no impact on life. So it's saying, in other words, carries them to the garbage pile is rusted out arguments. It has nothing to do with today because they're no longer in war. These thoughts are discarded as they shift their focus to the future. So they go to the garbage pile. In other words, they throw out those thought processes and they move on. Okay, so what I want you to type right here, some soldiers cling on to their views and beliefs about war, but those views are irrelevant and have no impact on life today. Some soldiers, once again, sorry, some soldiers cling to their views and beliefs about war, but they know they are irrelevant and have no impact on life today. So those thoughts are discarded and their focus shifts to the future. Okay, so if they're talking about the future, in other words, that's talking about the beginning here. Okay, so I'm going to type in beginning here. And if they're talking about the beginning, that's obviously indicating a little bit of optimism. Okay, next stanza here. We got 2 left. Those who knew what was going on here must make way for those who know little, and less than little, and finally as little as nothing. Sorry, that was my dog. He has a squeaky toy. So in times of war, there's always going to be soldiers that have kind of amassed this great deal of experience and knowledge. And then there are soldiers who are still ignorant to the realities of war and haven't constructed their own understanding yet. So knowledgeable soldiers who have a deeper understanding of life must accept and support those who don't yet know the world in which they live. So those who knew what was going on here must make way for those who know little. So there are some, once again, there are some soldiers who understand what's going on and understand the reality that war has given everyone. And then there are some that don't understand, and they're ignorant, meaning that they don't understand it. Not saying that they're stupid or dumb, it's just that they don't understand the realities of war. So those soldiers have to accept those who don't yet know the world in which they live, because they're not there yet. Okay, so I'm going to type that one out because that one's kind of long. So in war and after, there will be soldiers who understand the true impact that war has on the realities of life, and there will be soldiers who are ignorant and don't understand those same realities. Those knowledgeable soldiers who have a deeper understanding of life must accept and support those who don't yet know the world in which they live. So this is still kind of talking about the future. It's talking about the past, right? Because it's saying, you know, that those that are knowledgeable and understand how the war impacts everyone. It's talking about the past in the sense that the war is in the past, but it's saying that those soldiers need to accept and support those who don't yet know the world in which they live. So this is talking still about a new beginning and learning to accept those that don't understand. This does not have any emotion attached to it. So this is definitely going to be objective. So I'm going to type that in there. Okay, go ahead and pause the video here if you're not done typing this out yet, because I'm going to erase it. Okay. So last stanza here. In the grass that has overgrown causes and effects, someone must be stretched out, blade of grass in his mouth, gazing at the clouds. So sometimes in times of war, what this is kind of talking about, when someone's stretched out, blade of grass in his mouth, gazing at the clouds. So when you're thinking of that, when you visualize the imagery that's going on here, that's showing someone who's just kind of laying down, very relaxed and everything else, and just kind of staring off into just kind of cloud gazing there. So what she's talking about here is sometimes in times of war, and even directly after a war has ended, soldiers find themselves daydreaming, and they're just kind of fully detached from today and longing for, you know, either the end or for a new tomorrow or a brighter tomorrow, if you will. So they're no longer really immersed in the realities of war. They're fixated on the future. So when someone's daydreaming and everything else, they're not really in present tense. They're not really in the present. They're thinking about the future and trying to think about a brighter tomorrow. So they're fixated on that future and its possibilities. And she uses this imagery of like these possibilities that run wildly through them like lush overgrown grass. So that's just kind of this optimistic viewpoint of thinking about what life could be like tomorrow or in this new beginning here. So once again, I'm going to verbally say this one. Sometimes in times of war and directly after, soldiers find themselves daydreaming, longing for a new tomorrow or a brighter tomorrow. Sometimes in times of war and directly after, soldiers find themselves daydreaming, fully detached from today and longing for new beginnings of a brighter tomorrow. They're no longer immersed in the realities of war. They're fixated on the future. Once again, they are no longer wholly immersed in the realities of war. They are fixated on the future. So obviously that's indicating this new beginning, which is what I would definitely put here. So a new beginning, it's not talking about the past. And it's if this person is daydreaming and these soldiers are daydreaming and they're thinking of a brighter tomorrow, that is definitely more optimistic. Okay. So go ahead and finish that one up if you have not already. Please notice that I did the whole thing with you. You are welcome. If you are paying attention and reading through it, or listening to the video, I'm sorry, you will have the whole thing filled out. Go ahead and pause the video if you need to. I'll meet you back on the PowerPoint. Okay, so you have your next task here. Hopefully you enjoyed reading that poem. You're now ready for assignment 5C, but if you are listening to this, you don't have to do this assignment. I'm not going to require it. So just on your paper, let's see, what can I have you put on here? Just right next to this, I want you to, actually, not there. Let's put it at the end. Let's put it at the end this time. So just at the end here, I want you to say who your favorite musical artist is. Like who's your favorite singer, favorite group, favorite rapper, what have you. Just go ahead and put that there instead of doing the Racisi's paragraph. Go ahead and do that. Okay, your last task here. Of course, I still want you to do this. This is just your independent reading. On days that you're not doing the Achieve article, like on Mondays, you need to be reading at least 4 times per week, 20 to 30 minutes. Make sure that you're filling out that reading log. You still get points for every week. I really appreciate you guys engaging in the virtual classroom this week. I hope that this was helpful. I hope this video was helpful. I'm sure that it was for those of you that diligently watch them. I have quite a few of you that do that, and it's very evident. Stay tuned for the next lesson for Monday. I'll put it out on Monday. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. If you have any questions, feel free to join the live sessions. I have them Monday through Friday from 9:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. if you have any questions. And that's it. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Don't forget to smile this week.